Welcome to A Cup of Gratitude with Amanda Schaefer. Hi, I'm your host, and I'm so glad you stopped by. This podcast is really for anyone, anywhere, anytime. And it's about taking a moment to slow down and look around and actually see all of the good things that are there. There's no question that asks, is your cup half empty or half full? But I think a better question is, what's in your cup? I mean, a drop of gratitude will benefit your life unimaginably more than a full cup of anything else. So let's settle in and take a look at how we can shift our focus and embrace the joy and the wonder of the life that we have. And once you start, you won't be able to stop seeing the good. And just like me, you won't be able to stop talking about it. And somehow that creates even more. Even in the midst of difficulty, even when it's really hard. Learn how to drink from a cup of gratitude. Welcome today. I'm speaking with Ron Keres. He is a husband to his best friend, Jen, a dad to 3 goofy boys and 1 sweet little girl, and the author of the popular Finn the Frog collection and Scariest, Silliest stories series. That one's hard to say. I'm proud of myself. After serving as missionaries for 10 years, Ron is now settled in Geneva, Illinois, and spends his days writing interactive and laugh out loud picture books that families love to read together. When he's not chasing kids or cracking jokes, you'll find him working out, fishing, or hunting down the best local eats. He is currently working on several new books, and I can't wait to share what's next with you by sharing him today. Thanks for joining us, Ron.
It is an honor to be here, and congrats, by the way, on your new book, Holy Plot Twist. It's really exciting to follow your story with that.
Thank you so much. God is so good. I wasn't even looking to write a book. I was very busy, and he was super clear and said, put everything aside and start working on this thing. And then literally brought a contract to me through a podcast guest, and it was just amazing how he did that. So I got the entire book out in 10 months from
Wow.
starting to write it to completion, which just doesn't happen if you guys are listening. Certainly not things that are like 200 pages long and full of
Right.
memoir and and
Yeah.
uh, and biblical theology. So yeah, thanks for that. It's been quite an experience, and I love it because I love God and I love people, and it gives me a chance to do both really well.
Yeah. That's amazing. Well, you're crushing it.
Well, thank you. And so
Yeah.
are you. I absolutely, I wish I had some more little kids in my life, but
Yeah.
actually, I was considering getting some of your books and giving them to my church. I've been doing that a lot lately with people who are guests on the podcast since I don't have any grandkids. I'm just passing along these books as kind of a way to honor knowing you. So that'll
Yeah,
that'll be on my list.
for
So
sure.
as many of you know who listen, and if you're new to the podcast, welcome. But I do things just a little bit differently. We like to start at the beginning and work our way up to what's going on now, because when we do that, we're able to see all the places that God was working. And oftentimes we miss so much of where God was, what he was doing, or even doubt that he was there sometimes. And God has so many little treasures and threads along the way, things that he wants to show us as we go back. And it's such an important practice. It's not something that you do very often. How often do you go all the way back to the beginning? And I've found not only that it's been such an encouragement to me as someone who gets to be part of all of these people reflecting backwards, but I've also been able to see people be blessed by their own story, and that just proves who God is, right? Who
Yeah.
who else can bless you with the thing you think you know better than anyone else? The
Yeah.
author,
And when
of your
God's wanting us
stories.
to know who he is and his kindness, he
Yes.
tells us to look back and say, well, look at what I've done. And so I think it's a
Yeah.
really healthy thing to do, and see how Christ has worked through all of it.
Yeah, it's amazing. So, with that in mind, Ron, would you be willing to tell us a little bit about your childhood?
Yeah, you bet. So I grew up in Hickory Hills, Illinois. It's like a suburb of Chicago. And I have 2 brothers and a sister. And we were raised by Christian parents, but they were first generation Christians. So that just means that their parents were not Christians. And so they both have amazing stories of how they came to the Lord. But that just means that our childhood was great, but also not perfect, as they're trying to navigate how to parent us in a way that, is honoring to Christ. And so, we were all a bunch of little sinners, but they were also sinners too. And so, while there's a lot of positive memories, there's also some that I know shaped my story, but, I saw things that, were a direct result of, the way that they were parented. And so,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, we were just fun loving kids growing up. I mean, we went to public school, just had a lot of friends, loved fishing, did not grow up, wealthy at all. So like, we were always very considerate of, just how much we had to spend on groceries and things like that. But we
Yeah.
went to a Pentecostal church growing up. And that for me, mostly my experience with that was just in more of like the kids programs. And so they were just great kids programs. I was part of something called Royal Rangers, which is like the Christian Boy Scouts. Maybe you've heard of it.
Yeah,
Um,
I have. Yeah.
yeah. So it was a positive experience getting to use knives and axes and have these like little marching things that we did and powwows and stuff like that. And so
Hmm.
overall, I mean, I grew up, hearing the gospel every Sunday at church and in my home. My parents, were just, my dad worked hard to provide for us. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, which was awesome. And
Hmm.
yeah, I just felt loved. But yeah, just know that God was working on me too, in ways that I didn't even see at the time.
Yeah, that sounds like an awesome childhood. And honestly, not everyone has that experience. It's really a blessing. One of the things that stood out to me when we were talking about your childhood and understanding of faith is I think most kids, you have what your parents provide for you, and at some point in time, you go through the wrestling of choosing it for yourself or not. But you said that you didn't fully understand accepting Christ, and so you kept repeatedly accepting him. And I was wondering if you remember anything about how that felt.
Yeah, so like I grew up during the Billy Graham era, right? So like the Christianity was dominated by this evangelistic style of Billy Graham,
Hmm.
and Billy Graham is a great man, right? But like so many churches adopted this style of like pray to receive Jesus, and it almost became a thing that wasn't as much about like truly trusting in Jesus and obeying him. It was more of like accepting him into your heart, and that's just kind of what came out through the
Hmm.
church. And so I knew I did not want to go to hell. Like I knew that.
Yeah.
I respected and believed in God. I understood what Jesus did. So there was just always this kind of altar call that was happening, whether you went to the front or just did it in your heart. Like I was
Hmm.
wanting from a young age, from like 8 years old, to receive Christ as my savior. And I would say I was as genuine as I could be at the time, but it
Hmm.
was not really fully explained. I feel like what was explained well was the passive obedience of Christ, where it was like he went to the cross to die for your sins. But what I didn't understand until I was a young adult was the active obedience of Christ. I don't think it like was really ever preached about how what he did during his life to actually
Yeah.
be righteous in every way, so that when we believe, not only is our sin, transferred to him, but his righteousness is transferred to us. And
Yeah.
he worked on our behalf, so I don't have to work to earn my righteousness. And there's just something that was missing there. So every time I prayed to receive Christ, it
Yeah.
was more of just like, I don't want to go to hell. I know I'm a
Yeah.
sinner, but there is
Yeah.
no power to actually change my heart to say like, I now cannot be loved by God more or less with anything I do. And so I kept trying to do better, and I'd be like, I'm still sinning. So I'm going to go pray to receive Christ again. And so like I
Yeah.
must have prayed that prayer hundreds of times and never really saw a heart change. And I
Hmm.
think that's not just to do with like the teaching I was getting. It just had to do with God's timing for everything and
Yeah.
how he wanted it to work. So yeah, I think there was just I don't know if you would call it a half gospel, but it was just I don't think it was a full gospel that I was
Hmm.
presented with growing up.
Yeah, and I appreciate your sharing about that because I think a lot of people find themselves in that loop because they didn't ever receive the full truth. They received parts, and of course, nobody wants to go to hell, quote unquote. And as a child, it's a difficult thing. But I also think, as we'll get further into your story with being missionaries, I think it's really interesting that God allowed that to be part of your story, that you
Yeah.
understood the confusion and then you understood when you really knew, what was being offered to you and how Christ lived. And so I think it's really important to someone who did missionary work to understand what it's like to be confused, and to
Right
try to
on.
earn
Yeah,
it for yourself. So it's just like a little part of
exactly.
your story that I found interesting.
Yeah.
So this Christian school that you went to, was that something that helped your faith and understanding, or was that more of that traditional kind of
Yeah,
confusion?
it's a good question. So like we had moved from that town, yeah, I moved that had to do with kind of my dad's job
Hmm.
situation out to more of like a farm town about an hour or so away called Big Rock. And
Hmm.
the reason why we went to a Christian school was because the local public school was so small it didn't have a football team. And our parents really knew that we wanted to play football, and so the best option was going to this school called Aurora Christian. And
Hmm.
so they signed us up there. And overall, I look back on that as a positive experience. I had some great friends there. I was part of the football team, which was teaching me amazing disciplines. And because our coach, actually Don Beebe, maybe somebody listening might know who that is. He played for the Buffalo Bills and the Green Bay Packers.
Uh-huh.
Was just on fire for the Lord, and so
Hmm.
were his brother and some of the other coaches. And so we got a lot of just great input through that, but it was still at the peak of my sinful curiosity. So though I was a moral person when someone was to watch, I wasn't like just that bad kid. Like in
Hmm.
my heart, I wanted to pursue women. I wanted to
Yeah.
kind of keep, exploring drinking and
Hmm.
things like that. But overall, I was selfish. And so though there was good input there, I don't, I don't think I ever had this powerful gospel preached to me that,
Yeah.
I could remember there. It was
Yeah.
a lot of good teaching, but I still wasn't getting what I think I really needed to hear.
Hmm. Yeah. And I love how God does pursue us, right? I'm 61. I received Christ 24 years ago in my home, in a
Hmm.
moment when I finally did actually admit some things and understand some truths, even though I had heard the gospel and I had so many seeds waiting to take root and start growing, right? As soon as I
Yeah.
finally got to that place. But I love the fact that along the way, again, when I look back, I can now see some of the things that didn't work for me when I'm trying to come alongside someone who's seeking. And again, I could see how that plays into your story. So
Right.
you had told me about getting to this point where you did though start having friends over to tell them about Jesus. So can you tell us a little bit about that time and why you were doing that, do you think?
Yeah. So, I was after high school, I went to a community college just to save some money. Like our parents didn't have the ability to help us at all with
Hmm.
college. And so I thought I could at least get some of the basic courses out of the way by going to community college. During that time, I was working at a store, called Dick's Sporting Goods. And you know that. And I had been in a relationship with this girl, not from my high school, just somebody I met through a mutual friend.
Hmm.
And we were dating for probably around a year and 10 months total. And, it was we were happy together, but it was a pretty carnal relationship that I was just trying to
Hmm.
satisfy my sinful cravings. And
Hmm.
it just got to this point where I was unsatisfied, and because I was unsatisfied, she was unsatisfied, and I didn't have the emotional willpower to break up with her because I was starting to get just kind of pricked by the Holy Spirit, like this isn't right, this isn't good,
Yeah.
this is not going to end well.
Hmm.
Just trying to preserve my own holiness and future, and so like I I was making that clear that I was not happy in our relationship, but I didn't, like I said, have the willpower to break up with her. Thankfully, she broke up with me, which I wasn't thankful
Hmm.
for at the time. But because of that, I just got to this emotional low point where I just felt wrecked. Like everything that I had poured into for almost 2 years, everything I
Hmm.
thought love was just kind of was gone. And I don't know, but like anything besides that, it was the grace of God in that moment that the gospel finally made sense to me. I just
Hmm.
had this moment of realization of who Jesus is and truly what he's done for me. And I started reading the Psalms, the Proverbs, Romans, and I felt like everything was just speaking directly to me. And that's just how
Mm.
awesome God is, right? It just felt like it was written for me. And
Yeah.
I had tried to read the Bible all growing up, and I felt like I was just staring at words. I was actually looking at it now, and I knew something was different. And
Yeah.
that's the illumination factor of the Holy Spirit. He was actually illuminating for me what these things meant and helping me apply it to my life. And so I was just converted in my bedroom that night. I still was staying at my parents' house, and just everything changed. It felt like I woke up from a dream that I didn't even
Mm.
know I was in. And it
Yeah.
truly, my desires changed. And I thought, well, what's the first thing I want to do? All my best buds from high school football, I'm going to have
Yeah.
them over because they know me as, good football player, nice guy, but kind of a tool, just a selfish guy. And
Yeah.
so I had them all over, and I said, I want to tell you guys what's happened. And so I remember them just like sitting around the fire pit in my parents' backyard. My parents were kind of shocked I was doing this too. They were excited, but like, a little
Yeah.
like, what's going on here? Is this real? Because I know my parents have been praying for me and wanted me to be saved, and they knew they weren't in control of that. But I remember these guys sitting around the fire pit, and like some were looking at me like, this is weird. Like, I don't really want to hear this. And some were like, that were
Yeah.
actually believers, were like, this is awesome. Like, Ron's
Yeah.
saved. And so, yeah, it was just like a turning point for me. It was like, not only am I saved, but I want to share about it. And that's something about me that has always been there. I'm a salesman. Like, whenever I believe in something, I want to share about it with others. And so
Amen. Yeah.
that was just
Yeah.
kind of part of the process.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of proof then that that really is you really did make the transition and believe. And I write little notes sometimes. I wrote down on the side when you said everything I thought love was gone, and that's when I understood. And it's like sometimes I think we have to clear out the clutter. For the Holy Spirit to be able to settle in and show us. I love the fact that He illuminated His Word and everything started to make sense, and you were able to see the truth. And the other note I wrote was like God's word doesn't come back void without
Mm,
accomplishing what he sends it for to do. Now, that doesn't mean that the first time we see it, it works. It means it will not come back void. He's going to do everything with his word that he plans to do. And so um, it's just a beautiful story to see that happening. Um,
yeah, and it's not a mistake on God's part either. Like, you think about,
yeah,
he could have saved Paul before Paul killed Christians, but he saved
that's
Paul
right.
after he was killing Christians so that he would be able to say, "You guys know what I did before. Now look at me."
Yes.
And so that's
Yeah.
just like, it's not plan B. That's like God's plan A. And like, we could get so
Yeah.
crushed thinking like, man, I wish I would have never had that relationship with that girl. I would have
Hmm.
just been that much more pure for my wife. But no, it's like that's what he wanted to do to make our relationship even better. So
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. And when you can embrace the whole story, and you can understand that God does things that sometimes don't make sense, and he's looking at this bigger picture, and it's so much more complicated than we will ever understand because he's trying to do the most good for the most of his kids all at the same time. He sees it differently than we do. And so the fact that his plan is to have us go back to people who knew us before and for them to see this major difference. I was dead, I'm alive. I am completely different. I was quiet, I was shy, I was depressed. People meet me now and they're like, would you please stop talking? And my joke is that God's like, okay, someone else is trying to pray, Amanda, because I just can't stop talking about Jesus. I just can't. And I'm so outgoing now in Christ. And so the people who knew me before, they know there's a difference. Now, some of them, some family members who still don't believe, want to attribute that to other things. I won't let
Right.
them. And they know and they're watching. And so I love the fact that you did that right away, though. That is really great. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Then you end up transferring to another college. Where did you go, and what happened there?
Yeah, so I transferred to NIU, partially because it was about 30 minutes away from my parents' house, partially because it's like one of the cheapest Illinois state schools. And I knew everything that, it cost was going to be a loan that I have to take out.
Hmm.
I did get some financial aid, but it was all on me. So I went to NIU. When I was in community college, I wanted to do physical therapy just because in football I had a great physical therapist that was working for the team, and I thought, oh, I want to do that, but the more I went into it, I was like, this is probably actually harder schooling than I'm capable of.
Hmm.
I wasn't like the most studious person, and I'm still not. But anyway, my parents were like, you should do physical education. Like, you love kids, you love sports.
Hmm.
You're loud and outgoing. So I was like, yeah, it's not a bad idea. And NIU has a great PE program. And so, yeah, I transferred over there my sophomore year, which would have been 2007 in the fall.
Hmm.
And so, yeah.
And you ended up during that time meeting your wife, and I would love to hear a little bit about her. She ended up telling you about Crew. If people don't know what that is, you can tell us about that. And you began being discipled. So, I mean, this just sounds like such an exciting time for you.
Oh, yeah, it was super fun because every kid, I think, especially boys, need to get out from underneath their parents,
Hmm.
headship, so to say. And so I was like growing in Christ, but I knew all of my past is still present in that home where I grew up. And so like I kind of needed to get out and get under some other godly men and women. And so it was
Hmm.
really exciting time because I was just like the world was in front of me, right? And I could, just grow in new ways without any past judgment. And so I actually met my wife before going to NIU. It's a funny story. We were both working at Dick's Sporting Goods at the same time during that
Hmm.
time in community college. And I worked in like camping and water sports, and she worked in apparel. And every now and then we would kind of cross paths, but we kind of became friends. This was like
Hmm.
we met before I was a believer, and so I was dating a girl. I was not a believer, so we were just like friends. But then when I became a believer, we started getting a little bit closer because now we had more in common because she already was an actual true believer and she saw the difference in me. But when we started going to NIU together,
Hmm.
she had told me about Crew because her friend Joel had told her about Crew. Crew is just Campus Crusade for Christ. It's just a campus ministry that's pretty much all over the nation, even someplace
Hmm.
all over the world. And I said, well, that sounds really good. Other students wanting to grow and learn, that sounds great. And so we started attending that. There was like I think it was like a Tuesday evening meeting in one of the classrooms, and then there was like dorm based Bible studies. So I was in like Stevenson Tower. So there was a Bible study in there being actually led by the director of Crew at NIU. His name's Brent
Hmm.
Batiste. He is one of my heroes to this day. And so, yeah, I started going to his Bible study, kind of took me under his wing. And I had never in my life been discipled and never in my life been around a guy that's like just so encouraging, so
Yeah.
fatherly, encouraging, and nurturing. And so I just was like soaking that up and not only just learning how to study the word and how to apply it to my life, but he was very passionate too about giving what we've been
Hmm.
given away. And so that was kind of like his saying, whatever you've been given, give it away. And so there's this
Yeah.
immediate kind of like, hey, don't hold on to this. You're meant to share it. And so
Amen.
same thing with
Yeah.
Jen. Jen was, being discipled and going to these meetings and stuff like that. And so there was even kind of what was a turning point for me when it
Hmm.
came to my journey towards full-time ministry was one of the guys, his name's Derek Joseph, one of the Crew staff. He said, I'm going to be doing a class on sharing your faith and evangelism. And I'm like, I
Hmm.
want to take this. I want to do this. So I went to this class just fully expecting to be sitting and learning, which we
Hmm.
did for like the first hour. He talked about how to share your faith and things we might run into. He's like, all right. And then for the second hour, we're going to go out and do it. And I was like, what? Like, so
Awesome.
I was like shocked at like,
Yeah.
we're actually going to do it because don't Christians just learn? They never
Yeah.
actually do. And so,
That's so
it's
cool.
like, yeah,
Yeah.
so it was really neat. Like we got paired up with somebody who was, more experienced or confident in doing it. So the first time I watched and kind of like helped a little bit, but then I was like,
Uh-huh.
this is what I was made for. And it was like,
Yeah.
it didn't take long for me to say like, okay, once I got past the initial nervousness and butterflies, it became one of my favorite things to do on campus and just running into all these things, all these, questions and arguments that are actually like speeding up your growth because you're like, well, now I want to kind of find out how do I
Yeah.
answer that? And it's helping you grow in your faith at the same time. And so that was where I was like, man, I want to do this full time. And so I was like, okay,
Yeah.
PE is cool. Like I'm going to finish college, but I don't know if that's going to be my long-term goal.
Yeah, I can hear just how excited you got just in recounting that part of it. And really, I feel like everybody should feel that way. I know just because I'm an outgoing person, that's probably not fair. But I mean, we're all created differently, but we're all meant to go out into all the world and make disciples. And so, whatever your personality, right? Your story is your way that you do it. You know, God has made you perfectly to reach certain people, but I can hear how you came alive, and I feel the same way. I was like, how can I spend more time with people? How can I spend more time just loving on them and showing them who God is? And um, meeting people right where they are on the street is a very interesting thing to get thrown right into because you get so many different situations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well, I love that that God kind of exposed you to that right away. You and your wife, you dated for marriage. You got married in I think 2010, and you had told me during that time a lot of your friends went on mission, and like, what were you guys thinking at that time?
Yeah, yeah. So we knew when we got married that we wanted to do cross-cultural ministry and not just full-time ministry because there's two main reasons.
Hmm.
Reading the Word of God, I could not escape this fact that God saves us to make Him known among the nations, and one of
Yeah.
those nations, of course, is the U.S. But like, there was this like thing I just couldn't, like I said, I cannot not
Hmm.
see is that like He wants those who don't know yet to know, and then the
Yeah.
other part was almost all of our leaders with crew, and there was like five of them. 4 out of 5 went on to do cross cultural ministry. I'm like, why? They're so good at doing it here. Because I had this thought that like the missionaries are the people that maybe aren't as good at doing it in their own culture, but that's not true. It's like the people who are best at doing it in their own culture
Yeah.
should be the ones that are sent because they know how to actually meet people where they're at. And so
Hmm.
it was like, it once again is a paradigm change of like, wow, like I don't want to just become a pastor or a crew staff. Like I want to go somewhere where nobody else wants to go, where people
Yeah.
have no real access to discipleship and the gospel. So anyway, that was kind of the turning point for me. But we said, okay, let's establish our marriage relationship. Let's pay off some student debt, be plugged in at our church and learn and grow there, but then find an organization and go. It's kind of like a 5 year plan.
Hmm.
But then, like all these other people that graduated and were part of crew, they're just equally on fire for Jesus, and all were in the same boat where like they want to go become missionaries or go into full time ministry. And so we just expected it to take a lot longer for kind of the fruit to start to come. But one of our friends had gone to like a missions conference and heard this, president of an organization speak. Um, that organization is our organization called To Every Tribe. And it was just so compelling, the
Mm.
talk he gave. And he talked about how To Every Tribe provides 2 years of theological and missiological training with like on the field experience that you're getting every month in Mexico, and then one larger trip in the year just farther away places. And they're all
Hmm.
about like the local church and your elders being the ones that are like the authority over you and the ones that need to send you. And like just all of it was kind of like, this sounds too good to be true. And so we went from this 5 year plan basically to a 2 year plan where I was working as a PE teacher for a couple of years. My wife graduated a year after me, was a nurse, but
Hmm.
we were just like, our goal was getting there. So our elders had affirmed us to go to the training, kind of
Hmm.
taking it one step at a time. But yeah, it was like, honestly, it was like four of us from our group had all gone within the same year or two with To Every Tribe. And so in 2012 is when we started our training.
That's really exciting. And I love how you said, in my mind, it was a 5 year plan and then it became a 2 year plan because God has a plan. He really
Yeah.
does. And it's funny when we get on board. You can tell once you've kind of stepped into the plan, you're like, oh, this is great. This is exactly right. It this
Yeah.
this this makes me feel 100% like I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. So I love the fact that he got you on the right timeline. Now you guys moved to South Texas and you went into Mexico to begin to work with people. Can you tell us a little bit like what that was like?
Yeah, definitely. And before that, there's just a part that I remember too that is so important. And
Uh-huh.
that's my first PE job for 2 years was with emotional and behavioral disorder children in Rockford, Illinois. And if anybody knows Rockford, it's a kind of a rough place. But I was their first ever PE teacher. I was working with middle school and high school. And they were tough. Like we had to put them in controlled holds at times. I got spit on, I got chairs thrown at me, but I was getting to like share the gospel. And to me,
Mm-hmm.
what was very cross-cultural setting. And then my wife, she was working in a cardiac step down unit where she had patients dying. And what we didn't know at the time was that God was like truly using these professions to prepare us for the field, because that experience
Mm.
specifically for both of us became very relevant in the
Wow.
field we chose. So that
Mm-hmm.
was really neat. And then also during that time where we're prepping to go start our training, we were getting closer with one specific couple who became our
Mm-hmm.
teammates, Matt and Ashley Clockengay. They were some of the only other couple that stayed in our college town after we graduated, and so we were naturally getting closer with them. But then, yeah, as we began training, Moving to southern Texas was different. Like I don't like the heat, and so that was my first big step. But we
Yeah.
weren't going overseas, but that really was where we had to count the cost, where we were leaving our place of comfort in Illinois, leaving our
Hmm.
family, and saying we're starting this process to become missionaries. And even though we're still just like a flight or two away, it felt like leaving, and so that was a significant moment and cost. But it was awesome because we were starting training with 25 units. It was their biggest training year ever. And so it was basically 60% classroom, 40% hands-on. And so we would have different instructors come in, whether it was a pastor, a current missionary, a retired missionary, a missiologist, some of the local staff that had specialized in something. And we would get just a week focused on something that either was theological or missiological, just like how to actually
Hmm.
cross cultures with the gospel, and loving that portion of it. But then once a month you would go into Mexico. We had like 4 or 5 teams that would go to different areas, and basically in northern Mexico where it's very dangerous from cartel. So like that's another count the costs, you might die kind of thing.
Yeah.
We had to sign a will before we went into Mexico because it was just that serious. But
Mm.
we got to work, in another language, which Spanish out of all languages is one of the easier ones to learn. But it was still, hey, how do we do this in 4 days? Like actually try to pick up enough language to use. But we also worked with translators, which helped a ton. But you're just
Hmm.
working cross culturally with some people that were like no church in the town, and or maybe just a Catholic church, and some that had a church, but we're trying to pour into the pastor and their discipleship efforts. So that was amazing. And on my first year, so in 2012 to 2013, I went to Papua New Guinea as my like long trip. That was like the 3.5 week trip, and that
Hmm.
was a pretty life changing trip. Amazing. The second year, 2013 2014, I ended up going to Canada, which is the field we chose, which I can
Yeah.
share more about that in a bit. But yeah, the training was just overall amazing, and getting to be in this, kind of like apartment complex area with all these other missionaries in training was both amazing and very refining.
Yeah. I love your story because you can just see God just peppering in little things here and there along the way to be sure that you knew everything you needed to know, that you learned how to deal with different situations, different types of people, but that you were bold and that you were feeling, that you actually felt satisfied doing what he had for you. It's so
Yeah,
clear.
absolutely. It was
Yeah.
very clear that God was calling us to do that. And it
Yeah.
wasn't just an emotional calling. It was, like I said, the elders saying, you guys are gifted in these areas. We see your life is
Hmm.
not out of line with scriptures, and yeah, I just saw a lot of that lining up.
Yeah. Well, not every story is quite so clear, but as I'm sitting here listening to you recount things and listening in with God, it's like I don't know how to describe it other than when I'm on the other side of the microphone, I kind of listen with God intentionally, really trying to hear what he's saying. And there was this point when you were just talking where he didn't say anything, but he was smiling.
Mm, mm,
and
yeah,
and and I was able to really sense that like it just to see that everything you received the things he gave you to do, even the hard ones, kind of with joy, knowing
yeah,
that it was what you were supposed to do. So um
yeah.
yeah. Did you, when you went to Canada, tell us a little bit about that because that's probably was not what was on your mind originally, of where you would go, but it's definitely where you were sent. So tell us about that. What was it like? And explain a little bit where you were because I don't think people know. I know I didn't know when you and I first spoke some of the things that exist around that area, places of people were unreached.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think most missionaries picture themselves somewhere in like a warmer climate, jungle-y, like
Yeah.
overseas. And so that's kind of what I pictured. Papua New Guinea was amazing and beautiful and so many unreached people. The lowlands were way too hot for me. I just knew that was God doesn't call us to a place that we like absolutely hate, right? Like, and I was like,
Yeah.
I don't hate this place, but I would struggle to operate because of this heat. I'm
Yeah.
just I'm just naturally a very warm person already. So there's the highlands, more mountains. It was a little bit better, but it was like I don't know quite. It was right around this time that my pastor at the time, his name's Steve Lesson, he said he was very much part of our discipleship process, training us. He did, pre-team counseling with us and our teammates, and just poured into us so much that he said, "Hey, what would you guys consider Canada?" And I was like, "What? Canada? Like that's like the US only north. Like why would we go
Mm-hmm.
there?" And he began to explain about the First Nations people there, which I just was honestly ignorant. I did not know about them. I knew about Native Americans in the US, but I
Mm-hmm.
did not know that there was a massive population of First Nations people. And a lot of them were in very hard to reach remote places that you could only fly into. And
Yeah.
part of why he knew about them, this is a cool story. There's a guy named Frank Drown. He passed away several years ago, but he was a missionary to Ecuador for 37 years. He was actually on the team with the Ecuador Five that we all hear about from the movie Into the
Mm-hmm.
Spear, Nate Saint, Jim Elliott.
Yeah. Yeah.
He was actually the one who pulled their bodies out of the river when they were
Wow.
martyred. So he goes way back and has an amazing book called Mission to the Headhunters, which was a huge inspiration while we were preparing to be missionaries. But when he was on furlough, he was given some land in a place called Dog Lake, Ontario, where he was like building a cabin for him and his family, just kind of some rest from their work. But he was realizing that there's this population right there in Canada that was so similar to the tribal people in Ecuador. And
Mm.
eventually, when he got to a certain age, his missions agency made him retire. But he's like, well, I'm not retiring. I'm going to go to Canada and reach the people there. And so he was like doing some of the similar efforts with like
Yeah.
radio broadcasting, the gospel, and Bible studies and things like that. But he was running into a lot of roadblocks. It's hard for a white Christian to
Mm-hmm.
get into some of these communities because of the past. There's a really awful past that we probably don't have time to talk about today with residential schools that basically the short story is like children from age 4 and up, starting in the 1800s, were forced to go to these like Catholic or
Mm.
Anglican government run schools to basically assimilate into the majority of Canadian population. So they were ripped away from their family at the threat of putting their parents in jail. They were
Mm.
malnourished, physically and sexually abused. They were told that
Mm.
their languages are savage and that English is the language of God. Many of them died during this time, and their parents didn't even know till the summer came around. Like it was just like an
Ugh.
absolute tragedy, like horrible stuff. And you could watch a documentary called We Were Children. But so there's a lot of roadblocks there of as far as missionaries getting into communities. But Frank Drown knew my pastor in Sycamore, Illinois through a family connection. And
Mm-hmm.
he came one, I think it was like a Sunday or Wednesday to speak to the people and tell stories about Ecuador. And so when he came, he learned about the training that was happening in the church by my pastor of young men that want to go into ministry, preparing them to go into ministry, and said, I'm not talking about Ecuador, I'm talking about Canada. And
Mm-hmm.
so he started sharing stories about Canada and the need to go there. And he challenged my pastor. He said, "You're going to be the one to send missionaries to Canada, and I'm not going to die until you do that." And so it was
Wow.
like this, yeah, I mean, this missionary bold thing to do. But my
Yeah.
pastor took that seriously, and he was like, "Wow." And so it wasn't at this time that we were there, but we came several years later and expressed interest in missions. And he was like, "Oh, maybe those are the ones God's bringing me." So he had challenged us to think
Yeah.
about going there, shared about residential schools. We watched this documentary and we were just like heartbroken because it wasn't that these people never heard of Jesus or that they
Yeah.
couldn't go to YouTube and listen to something about Jesus because a lot of them speak English now. It's because so much damage had been done in the name of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And people were not presented with the true gospel. It was the white man's gospel, is what they call it.
Yeah.
That's not their gospel. And so it was a whole different challenge. And so when we went in 2014, or it was actually 2013 is our first exploratory trip,
Mm-hmm.
learned enough to say, okay, we're interested in coming to this field, but how do we actually get to somewhere? Who's going to invite us? It's a big deal as a white missionary to be invited to live in a community. And that's how we wanted to do it, is kind of more of
Yeah.
that incarnational ministry. We want to actually live among the people, not just take trips in. And so
Mm-hmm.
we had built this relationship in this town called Sioux Lookout, where it's half First Nation people, half non-First Nation. So it's kind of like a hub community. There's the hospital there, the airport there. It's kind of like everybody comes through there from all the remote communities further north. And there's a church there that had one guy in it who was on the leadership team at the time that had worked a lot in the north, specifically in this one community called Cat Lake. And he had a huge heart for reaching people in the north with the gospel. And he had great friends in Cat Lake, one by the name of Charles Wesley, not the Charles Wesley who wrote the
Yeah.
hymns, but yeah. And so he said, I'm going to try and connect you guys to Cat Lake. And so he talked to Charles, and Charles was already asking him, hey, we need
Mm-hmm.
missionaries in the community, because Charles is a believer. And he said, we
Yeah.
really need missionaries in our community. At that time, Cat Lake was in um, a state of emergency because of the opioid usage in the
Mm-hmm.
community. It was just like 70% of adults. It was just really brutal. And
Mm-hmm.
so we had gotten the initial invitation that Charles spoke to the chief and council to see if we could come for a visit, a 2-week trip.
Mm-hmm.
And my family had one child at the time, my son Owen, and then Matt and Ashley had their first Gracie. And so we were invited to come into the community. It was February. So going from South Texas in February to Northwest Ontario. So there's Ontario is huge. This is not Southern Ontario like Toronto. This is Northwest
Yeah.
Ontario, closer to like Manitoba, Winnipeg. And
Okay.
there's 17 remote First Nation communities. And believe it or not, Cat Lake is one of the further south ones. There's way more that go north. But our invite was to come to Cat Lake, which we just saw God laying out that for us so that our spring trip during training could be to the place that we might want to go long term. And so we
Right.
went there, and our goal was not teaching a bunch or anything like that. It was just trying to learn and get to know the community, let them get to know us. And God did enough in those couple weeks, even through the cold and through some of the, not great welcomes we received by some people.
Mm-hmm.
Really saw enough to say this is where God's calling us. And kind of funny story about that: when we landed, there was so much prep that went into that trip because it's just such a
Mm-hmm.
big deal. It's kind of scary. When we landed, only thing in my mind was like when we would arrive in a new village in Papua New Guinea, like the whole tribe came out to see us. They were excited. Some of them never seen a white person before. And
Mm-hmm.
then we get to Cat Lake, and I'm like, what do I expect? And so we land at this little airport, and there's all these cars at the airport. I'm like, wow, they knew about us coming. They're here to see us, maybe meet us, say hello. But I get
Uh-huh.
off the plane, and I'm like, so Charles came up to help us with our bags and say hello, but nobody else is even looking at us or saying hello. I'm like, what is
Right.
going on here? And then all of a sudden, another plane lands that has a bunch of packages that people were waiting on, like their mail coming in. And I
Right.
realized that they came there for the mail, not for us. And it was like that humbling moment of like,
Yeah.
you're not as important as you think you are. Like, this is all about God, not about you as
Yeah.
this great missionary. And so it kind of set the tone right for our time there. And so after that, we had expressed to the community that we were interested in coming
Mm-hmm.
there to live, and they
Mm-hmm.
officially invited us and gave us permission to build a home because there's no homes available for us to live in. They had a housing crisis at the time that they just did not have enough homes even for themselves. And so we started the process after we finished our training of raising money to build a duplex for our team to live in the community. So I know that's a
Yeah.
lot, but it's a big story.
No, no, I want to hear the story, and so does everyone listening. I think that's amazing, and I love the fact that you had to have an invitation to go, based on obviously the abuse that they had gone through in the past. But to know that you were actually invited, maybe you weren't going to be welcomed by everyone, but that you were welcomed there, is really important. The fact that there was so much going on. I'm really glad that you explained it all, and the opioid crisis and some of the other things they were dealing with. Um, what a situation to step into, where you could meet people who needed hope and healing. You guys, it took you 2 years to build the house, and get situated, and you were there from 2017 on, right? For about 7.5 years. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm trying to
Yeah.
think about it. Yes, so we moved in August 2017, and we
Yeah.
officially transitioned out in June this year. And so
Right.
it's just shy of 8 years. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when you and I talked, actually, you hadn't transitioned out fully yet. So I probably have
Right.
my notes from then. Um, in the midst of your transition out, you were having some family things going on with medical issues with your wife that had to be taken care of. And you and I stayed in contact. But I was just praying for your family as you did that. Transitioning out must have been difficult. Like, what was that like after
Yeah.
being there for so long with people who had to invite you in?
Yeah. It was tough. It was
Yeah.
really tough. It's still tough. So we originally moved to Canada in 2015, but like you said, it took 2 years to fundraise and oversee the building of the house in Cat Lake and then move there.
Hmm.
And so we were so happy there. Like, there's a lot of challenges because it's so far away from family. There's no restaurants. There's one small store. Um, it's not easy. That people grow up there, so that's their life. Like, they love hunting and fishing, and we grew to love I already loved fishing, but my family began to love fishing. We were doing partridge hunting. I did kill one moose during the time as well, and that was really an amazing
Wow.
cultural
Good.
experience. Just became part of the. They really welcomed us as part of their community. Like we learned a decent bit of the language, so that was like huge for the people. Our goal was doing a lot of youth ministry, trying to plant seeds for the next generation while also trying to reach adults that were interested. And so we had
Mm-hmm.
baptized and discipled several adults there during that time. We never wanted to start a church. We didn't feel like that was our job. It was what we wanted to
Mm-hmm.
do is more of the groundwork so that the people would start a church. And in
Yeah.
2020 during COVID, that happened. So we saw God do something beyond what we had thought was possible in our time there. And, just to see people following the Lord, had done so much more funerals than I ever thought was possible. There's just a lot of death in these communities. And so
Mm.
fishing, a lot of those, dude, you're just like, you're experiencing, even though it was 8 years, you're experiencing more
Mm.
than 20 years of life there because of
Yeah.
how slow time moves in the community and how everybody knows each other. And the
Yeah.
winters are super long. So I'm telling this part because that's why it was so hard to transition out. We
Mm-hmm.
we knew that God wasn't going to have us in Cat Lake all of our lives, and the people knew that too. We knew that when our kids got to a certain age, like our oldest, like closer to high school years, it would be time to transition out because they have no high school in the community. Kids that want
Mm-hmm.
to go to high school, some could do it online. I don't believe that's a great experience for high school, but they have to go out down to Sioux Lookout or another city, live
Mm-hmm.
with, boarding parents or some family while they go through high school. And I think that's a horrible thing to have to send your kid when they're not even
Yeah.
college age away from home. And so many kids drop out because there's just so much negative influence there. And so eighth grade, to make it through eighth grade is a pretty huge accomplishment in Cat Lake. And so we said, we just know we need more resources when we get to high school and
Mm-hmm.
preparing our kids for where they're probably going to live, which is probably not the community, but back in the US. And so there was that, but then there was also just some health issues that had come up where my wife injured her back. And it's just got worse and worse and worse over the years. And unfortunately, Canadian healthcare did not do much for her, even though she tried. And it got to the point where we were actually getting ready to transition out because of these issues. And also because of our family, our parents getting older and having some health issues that we said we don't want to not
Yeah.
be present for these very important years of our parents' lives and wanting our kids to be around them more than they were. We were just
Mm-hmm.
a little bit of that burnout of living so far away. But
Yeah.
we were back on a trip to be with my wife's mother for some health issues of hers. And we said, well, why don't we just get this process started of seeing how your back's doing? Because she could not get relief from the pain.
Mm-hmm.
And went in and they're like, you need an MRI right away. The x-ray was not good. And the
Yeah.
MRI, the tech didn't even want to let her leave because
Mm.
it was so bad. And she said, just wait for a call from the surgeon. And so the
Mm-hmm.
surgeon calls and said, you need to go to the ER. You can't wait for an appointment. And
Yeah.
so she had to have an emergency back surgery this past February. And I wept so much because it's
Yeah.
scary to
Yeah.
have a pretty serious back surgery, but also because like all those years that she dealt with the pain, raising children, homeschooling, being a
Mm-hmm.
missionary, like all these things she did because she loves Jesus, she loves us, she loves the people. And
Yeah.
she knew to get the surgery would mean coming off the field. And she just delayed that as long as possible.
Wow.
And just to know
Yeah.
as like a husband, I let her endure that. And like I don't want to say I wish I could go back, but it's like there was a
Yeah.
serious cost involved in being so far away and having pretty poor health care. And
Yeah.
so she got the surgery, which was a spinal fusion, and she had two vertebrae that were just basically rubbing directly bone on bone, and one was slipping off the other one. And so she had
Mm-hmm.
a spinal fusion with a artificial disc put in there, and then they cleaned out some of the, it's called a laminectomy, where they're opening up the pathway of the nerve, scraping off
Mm-hmm.
some bone. And so it was a hard couple weeks of recovery, but like she stood up and just cried. She's like, I don't feel the pain. And not only that, she looked taller. It was like crazy. She was
Yeah.
taller because she now
Wow.
had a disc in there again.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
so, it took a couple weeks, but she was able to hold the kids without pain,
Yeah.
the younger ones.
Wow.
And that was like a
Praise God.
miracle. She could
Yeah.
like exercise again and go for short runs and things like that. And she still has some pain from another issue she has in her SI joint. But I also injured my back years ago too while working out, and it's like a disc bulge that basically never healed. Once again, I couldn't really get great care in Canada, and so now I'm in the process. I actually just got a steroid shot yesterday. It was my second one,
Mm-hmm.
just to help with the pain. But my
Yeah.
goal is to get a surgery, which won't be nearly as intense as Jen's. This will just be like cutting off the bulging disc and doing a laminectomy for me. So hopefully the recovery is much shorter. But
Yeah,
just definitely some pain that we've endured over the years that I think all is part of God's plan to make us see how strong He is in our weakness,
that's
and that
right.
His grace is
Yeah.
sufficient. But yeah, still a considerable moments in our lives of these struggles.
Yeah. And it's weird when you think about the fact that all of that was wrapped into helping you leave at the time that you left, knowing that you gave it above and beyond your all and that your wife was willing to do so much and go through so much pain, but also that God was showing you when the timing was done. Um, is probably something that now that you're on the other side of her surgery is really reassuring, but at the time was probably just so difficult to hold it all. I know I was praying for you and your family. I was praying for her during that time. So praise God that she is able to hold the kids and able to do things. And, I'm sure she'll take the being taller as well. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, God is just so good. And I'm glad you're going to be able to get what you need as well. Now, eventually we'll get to I like to remind people around now to take a look in the show notes because I'll have media links for social media where you can follow what Ron's doing and links to his books. But I do want to end on talking about what he does now because it's such a different thing. The reason why I was originally connected with Ron was because he writes these amazing kids books, and I mean he has this built-in beta group, right? Your own kids probably you run them
Yeah,
by
right.
them. Tell us a little bit about how that started and what that is like for you.
Yeah, for sure I will. And just a quick note, though we're not living in Cat Lake anymore, and like I said, that was really hard, and the people were really sad. We're really sad. We are not done in Cat Lake. We will visit at least once a year, and we also run a youth camp every year. We just got back from that, where
Oh,
we have
that's
about
awesome.
30 youth fly down and go to this camp that we do Bible stories and games and activities. It's just amazing way to stay connected. And some other new missionaries are going to take our place in Cat Lake, but we're still praying for
That's
another family to join them because they need teammates. So God's good to care for Cat Lake, and I know He will keep doing that. So we have very dear friends there. But that brings me to just the short story I'll share about starting the book stuff. It was during COVID in Cat Lake that just all the regulations were dragging on, and I had more time than usual, and I was just dying for a creative outlet, and just was inspired one day. I'll spare all the details, but just to say, like, why don't I try my hand at picture books, because I love storytelling. I'm telling Bible stories
hmm
all the time. I'm reading picture books to my kids all the time, telling them made up stories. And I said,
hmm
why don't I just try this? Maybe it'll provide some extra income and just be a fun creative outlet. And so started that in late 2021 is when the idea came. But then 2022, I published my first two books in May. And yeah, I think a lot of people just saw it as like a fun project or hobby. And I kind of did too. I didn't know where it would go. One book
hmm
didn't end up becoming very marketable or selling much, but then the other one, it's called The Scariest Story You've Ever Heard.
hmm
It was inspired by a book I like called The Book with No Pictures by BJ Novak. And it wasn't written for Halloween season, but it's like sells well during that time. But it
hmm
it's like a really, really fun rhyming book with a big surprise at the end. So it's like not scary, it's silly. And that one sold enough for me to say to my wife, "Hey, could I do one more?" And so I
Yeah.
wrote one more book with this whole premise of like, how could I get a book that saves as much money as possible in the illustrations and the process? And I had this
hmm
idea for this character, which became Finn the Frog. I have a son named Finn, so it's Finn the Frog. My kids love
hmm
frogs, and so do I. But where he's like so proud of this perfectly white book that he lives in. And I'm like, oh, if it's white, that means there's not a lot of illustration. I'll save some money. It's just the frog. But then the kid reading the book, like most kids, are just like a little messy. So they're eating Cheetos. And so there's like
hmm
Cheeto fingerprints on the pages, and the frog's freaking out trying to clean them. Then the kid spills grape juice. So like the kid's eating a snack while reading the book. It's making
Uh-huh.
the book all messy, still very minimal illustrations, but a
Yeah.
really fun and interactive story where the kid reading the book feels like they're part of it.
Yeah.
And so it kind of took off as far as like, yeah, just like, it paid for itself as far as the costs it took to create it. I have an amazing illustrator named Arthur Lynn. but to have good illustrations is not cheap. And so,
Yeah.
I didn't want to just like totally lose money. And so anyway, when I saw that, even though I was still in the negative, like, hey, this is probably going to end up paying for itself, I just kind of kept going with it. And so I said, rather than start new book ideas, why don't I keep going with this frog series that seems to really be loved by people? It's a really great character. And so I have
Hmm.
This Book is Perfect is the first one. This Book is on Fire is the second one. That's where Finn cooks for the kid reading the book is hungry, but it just like doesn't go well. And then
Uh-huh.
there's This Book is a Mistake, which is probably my personal favorite. Really cool story with that one of how I was inspired to write it, but it's got an amazing message that whether you're a Christian or not Christian, you could take a lot out of about like just being content with who you are. But really, my message through it was trust the creator, and you could see that through the story. And
Yeah.
really great book just to teach kids that their value. And then
Hmm.
the fourth book is called This Book Stinks. The fifth book, which just came out in this month, it's called This Book is Viral, and that one's really fun. And then I
Yeah.
also have a sequel to the scary story called The Scariest Campfire Story You've Ever Heard, and that one's super fun too. And so those two scary ones are now with the traditional publisher, who I felt like
Hmm.
could just kind of take that off my plate, because it gets to the point when you're doing self-publishing, it's just like way too much to manage, and they could do more with it than I can. And so that's with
Hmm.
them. But I'm holding onto the Frog series for now because just kind of how I provide for my family right now. And publishing, I think you would probably know, like margin, are not amazing. Like it's a hard and competitive business. And
Hmm.
so to have more books is really the only way to make it a full-time living. And I also do author visits at schools. I do some webinars for other authors. And do like vendor events and things like that. So there's a lot of different ways that I combine to be able to provide for my family, but that is now my full-time job. I decided to transition out of full-time ministry so that my supporters, could give to other people in more need, even though To Every Tribe wanted
Yeah.
me to stay on. I am going to do more like contract-based work for them going forward with some training and visiting fields and things like that. But just focus on the author business for now so that I could really put my heart into it. And like I said, keep
Yeah.
providing for my family. And so I have another one coming out in January. It's called This Book is Mine. That'll be the sixth one in the Frog series. And I have more to come even after that, and some other completely different books as well.
That's so awesome. And you know what? It you are gifted to do it, and you can tell through your story. You've always been a storyteller. God's using that same part of you that loved evangelism and loved connecting with people. Now you're doing it with kids with the books, and I think it's great because the messages are great and they're fun. And we
Mm-hmm.
had talked about doing some sort of giveaway. Whenever your episode airs. So we will do a giveaway on Instagram, and we'll a lot of people that
Yeah.
follow me follow there. But that will be exciting. I love this for you. And this, you just sound so happy when you talk about it. And I wanted to ask you a question. I have one last question after this that I always end the podcast with. But when you were talking about providing for your family, and you were talking about the different stories and writing them, and how many are coming to you. It's so exciting. But one thing I wanted to ask was, when you talked about being in Cat Lake, how 8 years really felt like 20 years because the way things were slowed down, and the small community and the closeness of the community and some of the other aspects of being there, which life is just not like that anymore with all the technology and all the craziness. I think we're going way too fast. I still
Yeah.
remember visiting Greece one time, this teeny tiny little place. It was called Antipaxos. I think they had maybe 100 people that lived on the little island. And everything was so different there. You could just feel the pace being different. And so that was what was popping in my head when you were talking
Mm.
about living there. Do you notice with your kids, do you notice that the transition was hard for them because they spent, or was it just a positive thing that will be part of who they are now, spending that time in Cat Lake?
Yeah, we're trying really hard as parents to shepherd them through it, and not um, talking anything about all the positive and how missing it is good and okay, and
Hmm.
looking forward to those times that we get to go back. And so, yeah, it's their childhood home. Like my son Graham, he's my 10-year-old. He said it well. He said, "Dad, I could just close my eyes right now and walk through our house in Cat Lake." And I'm like,
Mm,
"Man, like I can too, buddy. Like, and
yeah,
I miss it. Like, and I sometimes just want to be back there."
yeah,
And our friends and routines and things like that. it was so beautiful how much family time we got there because there wasn't
Yeah.
this like rat race there. And it's such a community driven place. And so, um, yeah, so just like letting my kids grieve it with us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And also, though, trying to really get connected here. We have a wonderful church now. My wife and I love hospitality, so we're having people over all the time, and my kids are like growing that passion too. They're like, when can we have somebody over again? And it's
Oh,
just
that's
really neat.
awesome.
I think we just want to be the body of Christ that way to really
Mm-hmm.
be a safe home where people are well fed and well loved. And
Mm-hmm.
so they now have told us, my son Graham, it was a couple weeks ago, he said, I said, Dad, I feel like home is home now. And I was like, man, that was a
Oh,
significant moment for him to say.
yeah. Yeah.
And so I was really glad that they're doing well, but there will always be grieving over it because yeah, it's
Mm-hmm.
a special place to live up there in Cat Lake. So they told us we're always, welcome back. They will always be part of their community, and that just means a lot. And our kids we're all now dual citizens, which is pretty sweet. So we could
Oh,
go
that's
any
awesome.
any country we want without any reason. So
That's awesome. That's amazing.
yeah.
And I just wanted to ask because what a special place, to grow up in. But I would imagine that it would be quite an adjustment because the rest of the world doesn't live that way. And if you noticed, that passing of time being different, I was just wondering what it was like for the kids. So of course I expected you to be shepherding them well, but I love hearing that he said home feels like home now. That's amazing.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah.
And the fact that you can always go back is wonderful.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Thanks for asking all
So,
these questions, by the way. It's been good to share it with you.
sure, it's been great to hear it, and I know everyone listening feels the same. It's really fascinating and very encouraging. And it makes you think that really we do each have this story that God has planned for us. And when we step into it, sometimes there are twists and turns, and sometimes there's things that are unexpected, but each part of it, each season, when we're in it with him and we're in it for the right reasons with all of our heart, it's abundant, and you can tell that by listening to your different seasons.
Mm,
The last thing I want to say is you and I could probably talk for a couple more hours, go get some coffee, but
mm,
in light of time, I always end every episode with this question. Not that we can go back because we can't, but someone listening might be able to take the wisdom from your answer and apply it to their life today. So if you could go back and give any advice to your younger self, what would that be?
mm. I've thought about this, and gosh, it's like there's categories. Like if it's parenting, I have one answer. If it's ministry, I have another answer. If it's, just life with the books. But like, I think the one that came to my mind the most would be just like when God really lays something on your heart, don't ignore
Hmm.
it. And there's just things that I feel like were laid on my heart that God wanted me to do in Cat Lake, wanted me to teach on or organize that I just didn't out of fear of
Hmm.
like what people would think. And so that's one thing I wish, yeah, I could share
Yeah.
with people. And then the other thing with parenting is just like, honestly, it's relax. Like I know I can't save my kids, and that's not ever my goal. But as far as like having four kids,
Hmm.
I want them to be great citizens. I want them to be moral people. I want them to love
Hmm.
others and serve others and be thankful. And
Yeah.
so much I could have, high expectations on them. And I believe in teaching and disciplining kids, but it's just like just to relax a bit and just know that God's got it and just
Yeah.
yeah, just yeah, not as be as uptight.
Yeah. I mean, they're his kids. And
Yeah.
I'll never forget because my kids are both adults now, going through that process of, having them become grown adults and begin to have their own lives, and the grief of them, leaving um, the relationship we were in and getting into a different one where we're actually, both adults. I I learned that, God, he gave me these gifts. They're just these beautiful, beautiful blessings. But my daughter is way older than my son. And so when she first went off to college, I remember crying and crying and crying. I couldn't stop. And this is ridiculous. Like we were just so
Hmm.
close. And he took me to the story of Hannah, and he's like, hey, like she dedicated the child back to me, and so did you. And so you've done your time, you've weaned her, she is well trained up, but she's my child and she has things to do. And I never cried again. And
Hmm.
she's off living her life, making the world a better place. So is my son, and I know that's what you have in mind for your kids. And
Yeah.
it's just such a weird thing to go through. So he allows us to train them up and to love them well. And what a great gift.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Hey, I have one geek out thing that I want to share because I try to share
Sure.
this with everybody because I'm geeked about it. About
Okay.
6 or 7 months ago, I
Uh-huh.
found out that Jack Black read one of my books to kids in the hospitals,
Yes, I
in
saw
hospitals.
it.
Yeah, the scariest story you've ever heard, and it
Uh-huh.
was like a charity that connects celebrities to kids in the
Hmm.
hospital. And it's just like I like tell everybody because like, hey, you know who Jack Black is? Yeah,
Yeah.
I know him. So anyway, I like to mess around with that, but it was cool through that connection or through that happening. I was able to connect with that organization, and they invited me and my illustrator Arthur to also do a program with kids over Zoom. And I got to read a lot of my books and tell them some of my story, and Arthur got
Oh,
to draw
that's
Finn the Frog on
awesome.
the screen. So it was just really neat, and that could have been like over 1,000 kids. They said listening. We didn't get to see them obviously, but yeah. So that was really cool. I just love the doors that God's opening through this book business as well, and just
Yeah.
love seeing kids happy to read my stories. And so I have a website. Anyone could check those out. It's just ronkeres.com, but they're available on Amazon and anywhere else too.
Awesome. And we will have your website and any links that you want to share in the show notes will be clickable when people go take a look. And yeah, I geek away. I think that's amazing, right?
Yeah,
That here the very first one that you wrote, gets picked up by a celebrity and read and makes that connection for you. That's so cool.
yeah,
God's awesome. He's so
yeah,
cool.
absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for being willing to share your story today. I really appreciate your taking the time to do so, and I can't wait to release it and let people take a listen.
Yeah, thanks so much, Amanda, for having me.
Hey, so I just want to thank you so much for spending your time with me. And I want to challenge you to go out today and to just take notice and to stop and really look around and find at least good thing, one thing to be thankful for. You know, if you do that today, you're going to find so many more things tomorrow without even trying. Because once you start, you begin to see what's always been there. And if you need a refill, you can come join me again for another cup. Make sure to subscribe and have an awesome day and go be grateful.